Hello, good morning. We're almost at the time, but we'll give a few more minutes for a couple of other people to join. So please bear with us. Thank you. Okay, so I think we will get started as there are quite a few people now on the line joining us. So first of all, good morning or good afternoon or good evening. I think we have a good spread of people from around the various parts of the world joining us here today on this, the first Weidmann Medical Technology webinar. It's our first webinar of hopefully what will become a series where we can support our customers and potentially future customers in understanding more about Weidmann Medical Technology and the actual technology that we supply to the market today. I am joined by two of my colleagues who you can see here, hopefully, Daniel, Marty, and Eric Tauscheck, who will be delivering the presentation today. Just a couple of quick notes. We will be distributing the slide deck and a recording of the presentation afterwards, so you don't need to take too many notes. Also, in the top right corner of your screen, you should see a small speech box with a question mark in there. If you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, you can type them in there and we will have a Q&A session at the end where we will do our best to get to all of your questions and hopefully provide you with answers. Also, the contact details for the two presenters will be made available. Eric will be starting off today. Eric is our head of business development and account management based in North America, looking after the Americas market. And Daniel Marty is our head of engineering based in Europe, in Switzerland, in our headquarters in Rapperswil, close to Zurich. So with that said, please feel free to put your questions in at any time and I will keep an eye out for those. And I will hand over to Eric, who will start off the presentation. So thanks again for joining us, and I will see you at the end of the presentation. Thanks, Eric, and over to you.
Thank you, Francis. Uh, well, it is great to see so many people in attendance here. We really appreciate it. I have not met many of you, so I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Eric Tauscheck, and I represent Weidmann Medical in the USA. I office out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my experience is in contract manufacturing and tooling for the medical device industry. And I guess we can start the show here. So I will just now go through a brief introduction to Weidmann Medical. So we focus on being a leader in innovation and hold ourselves to the highest standards. And we are considered experts in plastic injection molding for the life science industry. We assist our clients all the way from product idea all the way to distribution. So we do offer the turnkey solution. As of a technological innovation, a custom solution and bespoke experience is certainly one of our many differentiators. And we serve companies worldwide and have production sites in both Europe and the North America. Currently, our products consist of 65% diagnostics and medical devices and 35% pharma and drug delivery. And Weidmann Medical is under the Weidmann Group. And what that means is that we are well supported, basically. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to my colleague, to Daniel Marty, who holds all the experience and knowledge in the RFID integration. Thank you and nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. So I will start then with RFID basic then. So also recently when we have discussions with customer, the knowledge about RFID is more or less not always the same. So sometimes it's just about what is RFID, what are the basics. And here on this slide, I don't go through all the details, but what you can see, RFID technology in the end is not something that's very new. So the technology of RFID is quite old. So even then from the Second World War, but even what we are knowing and using today comes from, let's say, the early 80s. At Weidmann especially, we do have the knowledge with integration into plastic products since 2008. So even for us, it's then more than 50 years of experience then working with RFID in the specific field of integration into plastic products. On the next slide, we can see how it basically, it's then what it's nowadays, sorry. So even for all of us, we do know how somewhere RFID technology is used. There are plenty field of different applications. So not only the plastic part, but especially what we do know from now on is then especially pay applications. So this was then a bright spread of RFID technology maybe 10 years ago, where we have seen that. Also with clothing industry, it has begun then also 5 to 10 years ago, where this is then used quite a lot. Also for pet identification, RFID is well known, or for security applications. So these are then applications where even in our day lives, the RFID technology has now been seen. Yeah. And that we can use RFID technology, that's also important to know when it comes to integration into plastic products. We always have then these three different types what we need. So specifically, there is the RFID tag on the right-hand side, and to read and to write, we need a kind of a reader. What you can see here is even a smartphone is a reader. So for sure, when you have used an Apple iPhone or an Android phone to make pay applications, this is also RFID technology. So every single smartphone is nowadays also an RFID reader and writer. And also for sure for bigger applications, there is typically also the use of specific software or data storage or data management necessary. And we are focusing especially on the RFID tags itself and its integration. What an RFID technology at the end makes unique is that you have a piece of electronic but without energy. So what we will see afterwards is also that there are on the market active and passive RFIDs, but especially in the combination then with plastic products, we are focusing on passive RFIDs. That means that we don't need any battery or electronics, but we have then the possibility of storing data by this magnetic field of the reader. So we have a passive IC element, but can make some electronics of it. That's the unique thing about RFID, especially if you're also looking for applications like Bluetooth low energy, similar ones that still use a battery or a source of energy, comparing them to RFID technology. On the next slide, there is a brief overview. Even from the first view we have seen, there are lots of different fields like security, like identifications. So therefore, a lot of different forms and factors are existing. Basically, all of them consists at least these two things is the IC, so the integrated circuit, and the antenna, so both things together. So typically the IC is this small black spot on a tag, and the copper thing is then the antenna. These two things belong always together, and there are only a few manufacturers of ICs, but a lot of different ones from antenna. Here it's quite important to know that there are some standards available. So this is then this different frequency where these RFID is working. there is this LF, so low frequency technology, and HF as high frequency technology, and UHF. And nowadays we are just talking then with a HF field and UHF field. For instance, it's quite important to know also for a possible use case, if you want to work, for instance, for a reader which can work with a smartphone, then you're talking about this NFC communication, which is a part of the HF technology. So therefore, you need then to choose such kind of technology in HF field. And if you want, for instance, to go for very cheap and small tags, then UF technology is then the right thing to go with. So we have hardly do anything then with the last 15 years, but mainly we are focusing on just these two technologies, so HF and UHF technology. And what's important then for any products and also projects is the way and the technology you want to have, for instance, also regarding the IC. So if you want just to having an identification, then you have a complete different setup of an IC, especially regarding the security, as when you're talking about integration into a pay application. On the right hand side, as I said, you can see a lot of different factors. What we have tried is not to make a case in the first step and then cover this case into a plastic part, which is quite often done. What we try to do is really using the bare RFID, so even with an air coil, or then also a label and integrate it direct into the plastic product so that we don't have a second housing. Typically also in our applications, we don't also have the space to do this. Then the next topic is then about the trends, or at least from our end, what we have seen from the past. When we go a little bit more back in the trends, for sure it was then a long time ago where even a barcode was then quite interesting then to use. Even nowadays, barcode are quite often used, but quite limited regarding then data. We have then also seen even on our products that the space is limited and that we have to use more data. Therefore, QR code was then generated also here with different technologies like printed QR codes or even then laser printed QR codes. But for sure, if we want to have more data, this is also somehow the space limited. And also a very important factor for RFID is that we can change the data. This is also somehow a must, because for sure, if you are comparing these different technologies from the price, an RFID technology is always more expensive than a QR code. But the main difference here, especially if you're just thinking about marking a product, is that you can change the data. This is not possible with a QR or a barcode. So these are in this field of marking the main advantages of RFID. So the bigger size, more data, direct on the product, and changeable data during the product life. On the next slide, we have also listed more advantages. So for sure, if you think about lab automations, we also have done once a use case where we just try to store all the data direct on the product. So for instance, when one from the lab has touched or has done any manipulation then on such product, so you can then also detect a timestamp and also localize all those things. What we also have said is then the high storage capabilities, meant by we don't need just to put a number on an RFID. For sure, we can do this with the RFID ID, also the identification of such a chip, but we can also store SAP informations, for instance, then on that product. And for sure, also different things when it comes then to patients. What for our integration always is important is that this is then the first step to a digital product, as we name it. And for a digital product, you also need somehow a communication, a software, and integration. Here we are working together with partners. So one of our main partners is KTS Systems, with them, they are also possible then to build up specific readers, specific softwares then for the needs of a specific integration for the RFID technology. On the next slide, we have typical applications, at least where we have seen and where we have done some use cases. So applications meaning by products or then for sure auto-injectors with different fields. So with auto-injectors, it's about then marking the different steps through the manufacturing process, but even then when it goes then to the patients in the end. Also pre-filled syringe closures, cartridges, patch pumps, or racks. So in every specific field, the needs are a little bit different. For instance, if you're talking about a rack, it's more than about blood storage and so on to track the samples itself. With pre-filled syringe closures, it's mainly at the moment then tracking also manufacturing process steps or batch records or identification of syringes. With the technical benefits, it's really about the information to the whole life cycle of such a product. So that's not only then meant by you can see it all the time. It's really about the changeable information on such a system, which is not possible by color code printing or labeling information. It's also about storage individual information on the product itself, because just you have more space on an RFID compared to QR label or any other technologies. And also interesting for bigger applications like REX, that you also can implement sensors. So what we have also done for blood tests or sample testing is integrating of humidity or temperature sensors, and you also can track these sensors and read them out by this RFID technology, so that you also have a tracking possibility not only of the identifications but also of temperature, humidity, or other sensors. And this gives you then the complete traceability of the product itself or even of the content of this product. What we think is the benefits then for the patients is also use of the risk, also of taking a wrong medicine or a too old one, so that there's always a track not only for the patients but also the doctors have then also to control what was when done, and therefore also therapeutics that can be done at home with observations then from the doctor. Or in the end, what we can see but still far away is that, as we have said, this is the first step of a digital consumable product to having also here a connectivity to a device, which is then for sure like a smartphone or even then an application for the patient itself, to have then here a connection between the consumable itself and the medical device. On the next slide, you would like to give you an example of a product demonstration, because this is typically how even right now projects are done. So we are working with demonstrators to see what are the possibilities of this technology, how this is working, what about the scalability. This is a project we have done from our own with this tube, where we tried then to show all our customers how such a novel molding process can be. Typically, we divide then the integration of such RFIDs into plastic products in different fields. For sure, sometimes there is the need that you want a complete encapsulation of such an RFID into the plastic product. Then we're talking from a two-shot injection molding. What we can see here is that we have tried and to use a one-shot molding, but with almost complete encapsulated RFID into this product. Why that? As I have seen one is then the advantage of not having a second step for making a housing over the air coil and then making an integration into the plastic product. Our idea was really that the housing should be the consumer product itself, and we want an encapsulation also due to sterilization of such things, and also for protecting the RFID, for instance, not to remove it from the product, so that we have really a good adhesion then between RFID label and or RFID tag to the product itself. What we have done here is really always the tricky thing about minimization. So typically we are foreseen about using very small RFIDs. And what we can see is that the RFID is typically better, especially regarding read performance when the antenna is bigger. So even here, when we are trying to use a specific RFID for the plastic product, the first target is always using as much big antenna as we can do. And for sure, the first step, we also try then to use off-the-shelf RFIDs, which typically is then not possible. On the next slide, there is the schematic process. So also here about scalability, we try not to do only CAD work here at Weidmann. We try then to bring some demonstrators. Demonstrator can mean that we are starting with prototype technologies like SLA and so on. Here we try then to come up with a complete industrial environment with robot system and also integration into a mold. So therefore we have took one mold and one cavity and prepared here these RFID steps. So what we can see afterwards then in the video is for sure that we have a station to prepare then the RFIDs, take them by robot system, lay them into the injection mold, make then the injection mold process. So for sure here's not a picture available, but you can see then on the next slide, and also take out then the part and the control station of the system. So this is typically how these injection molding processes are done. On the next slide, we can see schematically how in this case this was done. So we have an air coil RFID, so a naked RFID, which we are laying in the stationary side into this car. For sure, here it's quite important that the dimensions fit good and correct so that the RFID dimensions are exactly the same as the one we need into this in this mold core. Then there is the insertion process and afterwards then the injection molding. On the next slide we can see the real process. So first step is taking out the old part from the left hand side. So this is then the tube with the integrated RFID. And this is the insertion step where we are laying in the RFID into the mold and making then the over injection process. After that station is for sure then the quality control, where we just write something on the RFID to check if everything is correct working. And for sure, at least here from a quality perspective, reading and writing something on an RFID is for sure much easier than, for instance, also having a control of the dimensions of such a product. Okay, then you can go to the next slide. With this specific case, what you can see here with these rack and these tubes where the RFID integration was done, it was mainly the idea of having then an identification and tracking, so not the part itself, but the sample, which goes then into this well. The data storage was then through the product life cycle. So for sure here we have done a specific reader where then also a guy from the lab can access to it and make dates and stamps on the part itself. And one main target was here also not to make just a label on top of the RFID, so that we want to have embedded plastic parts and so protect then the electronics then from the environment. Next thing is about the quality. So here we have then the big advantage when we have everything put into one rack, we are also able then to build a specific reader, which is not only read out one specific part. So we can just put here in this case 96 tubes in one rack and read out all in one batch and make here a quite easy quality control. And maybe also interesting about scrap rate. So for this use case we have seen there is some scrap rate. We are losing from the antenna specifically, and some scratches on the antenna, and that we need to calculate with 4% of scrap. Yeah, as a summary, maybe here also some insights from some projects we have done. It's always very important then at the beginning of such a project that we do also know about the benefits of RFIDs and also look into what's in with the RFID technology. We have done a lot of projects just looking at identification and see, okay, we are coming right now from a 2D code and want to go with RFID just because it's nice, when there is not really a case where I do need one of these benefits, like reading multiple ports out in just one batch, or having some data storage over the lifetime or the life cycle of such a product with changeable data, or more data than is possible with a 2D code, then it's quite difficult that such a project is flying because, as I said, from a price view, an RFID label is always more expensive than just a 2D code. So that's for sure one of the main experience we have done in the last 15 years. What we can say about the injection molding process and the conditions to the RFID itself, it's then quite robust. So typically the IC is not that big issue. What we always see is then the combination between the antenna and how it's glued, weld, or whatever to the IC. So that can be a critical part or point. And for sure also the final application. So talking with very high specific security applications, or even then from the product size that is very complex part, or is it a very small part, or is it a very complicated, for instance. Yeah, also about the automated production, as named here. Also here it's quite different. So sometimes we have quite easily automated processes where we just can see, as you have seen in the video, that is very easy then to set up an automation process to make this integration. For others, like specific RFIDs or for labels, it's then quite difficult. For us, for sure, it would be very easy to having a big flat part and an interdrop and complete encapsulation of a label. That's very easy and fast done. When it's done like here, we also talk about a specific RFID development, and this is typically not done within just a few weeks. So then you start also with IC manufacturing, or even then the antenna manufacturing, combination of that and testing a lot until you have then a final RFID for the integration, and therefore the projects are quite different. Yeah, this was then the overview of the RFID technology. I do hope especially that we have then a lot of questions to ask about projects, or even maybe more about experience and so on. And I would be open then to ask right now then some questions.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you everybody for joining and also for submitting your questions. I do have a few questions for you, Daniel, that I hope you can answer. We had one early question in advance, and I noticed in your presentation that you talked about the melt deflection process, but somebody specifically asked them maybe you can share a bit more detail regarding the high temperature and pressure used in the injection molding process. How do we prevent that having an effect on the RFID tag?
Mm. Yeah, for sure. So especially in the product design, we try then to look that the gate point is not direct in the front of the RFID, because here we are also having high shear rates of the plastic. So this is then a huge impact to the RFID technology. We are also considering then from the design, what can we use then for a kind of technology. It It is different. So, for instance, if we talk about hard tags, then they are quite robust. There are even on the market available hard tags from instantly ceramic, where we can put them direct to gate point, and they do um, resist in the high temperatures. So typically, even here, we have done not only with PP, we have also done with PPSU, so very specific and high temperature plastic parts, some trials where we go up to 300 degrees of melt temperatures, 1000 bars to resist that. So that's then typically not that big issue. For instance, for label, we have different factors. Here it's really big game changer where the melt front is coming from. Here we also having then our own IP where we show how to protect a label from a melt front so that we can even put a label in it, because the difference here with RFID label is that we cannot use common technology which is used for in mold technology, so IML labeling. This is typically done with high static charge and load. This would just disturb then the RFID. Here we have used typically then vacuum to hold then the RFID itself, and then we just need to look where the melt front is from and protect the start of a label from the from the melt front. And in this case, then the RFID label is observing then also the injection molding process.
Okay.
What's interesting maybe here, we have also done specific tests also with sensors, so completed PCB boards injected, also with temperature and humidity sensors on it. And there's for sure then more difficulties. So here we have seen as more sensors you're having than on lip, more difficult it is, or it's just a restriction from the plastic part side. So with PP and cold molds, more or less everything is working as long as you don't have very complex condensators and so on a PCB board, but you cannot use then high temperature polymers then.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and you mentioned it brings me on to kind of onto another question that was asked. You mentioned there the different types of tags, ceramic as an example you said there. So I'm not sure how easy this is to answer, but of course I would like you to try, and it's about the return on investment for RFID technology. You mentioned standard labels, you mentioned different types of RFID tags, but also you mentioned that there is a cost component in your presentation. Can you give us any idea as to how the ROI is calculated, the return on investment, and how you implement that in a project?
Mm-hmm. So that's what I said. From our experience, it's very important that you know your, let's say, business case then in this regards. So what is the end customer willing to pay for more data or for an intelligent product? Because all the data or all the ROIs, what was calculated comparing to just tracking, will fail. But here we have done quite different approaches, and also to give you some numbers of costs of an RFID. I mean, even then, when we have started 15 years ago, everybody was saying, okay, RFID chips at the moment are very expensive. In the future, we will have different technologies for manufacturing such products. So everybody was believing that we see in somewhere in 2015 also printed electronics for RFID, which would be a big game changer. This was especially for the consumer industry, so for food, where everybody was thinking about we will no more see these barcodes on all the food packaging. We will see there an RFID, but just out of printed electronics. But nowadays we do know it was then too complicated to print then the IC. So therefore printed electronics is just for the antenna, and therefore we don't see a big shift in the price grid. So even nowadays, RFID labels specifically, so this is the cheapest way to do RFIDs, starts from 3 cents then upwards. So typically a standard label is between 5 and 10 cents with a little bit more data on it, more protective. It's about then 10 cents. So that's then typically what you can see in a UHF label. It feels a little bit more complicated. You're talking easily with 20, 25 cents per label. But for instance, to give you a number, with very high accuracy, so we have done one use case for the pharmaceutical industries for very specific glass syringes where we have put a ring on it with all the safety, with a very big storage. It was then also just a demonstrator. Even here, just the IC in mass production was then more than $2. So therefore, it's quite a big drift. And what we typically tried, and also in our projects, then giving the scalability factors. So somehow we try then to even do injection molded parts, as you have seen in this presentation. But sometimes it's also just easy to start with just a hand manufactured samples or manufactured samples with SLS technology to see what is your end customer willing to pay more than for this technology compared to what's on the market right now, or then to bring new business case up. So therefore, this is not a easy question to answer to say typically it's 1 or 3 years and then you're over. So it depends really then on the use case of the integration of such a product or RFID.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so basically it's about calculating what value your end customer has and identifying whether it's a necessary step in the manufacturing process to implement. Okay. A couple of final questions that I've had through. Of course, one is on environmental impact of going with an RFID tag. Are they environmentally friendly? Are they recyclable? I don't need an LCA calculation, but can you give me some more on the life of RFID tag?
Yeah, that's for sure then a disadvantage of the technology. So we have here then really an integrated circuit with is done then with chip manufacturing technologies, so like silicon wafers and so on, with some components. So typically with a label there is aluminium on it, or even then copper for air coils, or as I said, ceramic, and we put this together with plastic products. So from a point of view, yes, that's true. So from the environmental, that's not a very clever thing. At least from our end, what we have seen, also like this use case here, there is anyway the idea of having a track of a sample, so of a human sample, and then the product is anyway contaminated. So even right now, that does make a difference. You throw the part anyway away and to disturb it or burn it because it's contaminated from blood or from a human sample. So disregard anyway, you need to burn it, but that's for sure. It's not like reusing RFID or taking old ones. So from the environmental perspective, this is not a very clever idea, but it's not the way that this leads to the conclusion that the part would be environmental or more environmental without RFID technology. Nowadays, these consumer are mainly thrown away anyway. Yeah.
Okay. And then two final questions for you, Daniel, before we let you go. The first one is to get an idea of the timeline for this. So, you mentioned that maybe it's a pilot project that then moves to a manufacturing process. Specifically, this question asked about an existing manufacturing process. Can you give an idea of the timeline? You mentioned some use cases. Maybe you have some experience there that you can reference.
Sure, yeah. So for instance, we have done also use cases like this ring, which is then pulled on a syringe, which is then a new mold, just let's say a simple mold, also together with the development of an RFID. So this is then possible within 3 to 4 months, where we have built up then a new concept, new RFIDs, put this together. And there we are speaking of 4 months until we having then first prototypes. Let's say 500 prototypes is then possible within this time. We have also done on a very short term, like taking existing parts and products, remachine them and put existing RFIDs. Then we are speaking about 2 to 3 weeks. But also on the other hand, we have tried then to make some projects with a very wide range, so seeing very high amounts in the market, a very big capability regards scalability, so also the automation lines and so on. And then we will speak far away from that. So typically it's then about 3 years of an implementation until really a very high scalability factor for RFIDs. Yeah.
Okay.
So it starts with 2 weeks and ends with 3 years, somewhere between. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. I know it's not, not a straightforward question because there's a lot of variables there. Final question for you is relating to adapting to new regulations. Do you see benefits with RFID technology over traditional labels or other technology, I guess, that's available in the market? Do you see
Yeah.
regulatory advantage?
Sure, yeah, especially when it comes then to single product marking then. So what we see then on very high price products, even right now in the medical sector, for instruments or implants, this can come also to consumer products. This would be easily possible then with the identification of such a product, and here clear benefit then compared to the things like again barcode or 2D codes. Also, when it somehow we have also one use case with cryo cooling of those products. So typically, when you just pick out a product from minus 200 degrees, you just cannot read anything on the product itself. This is also a very big advantage of the RFIDs, and also regards regulation. This gives you just more security and safety because you also can have then the digital footprint of such a product, not only by scanning it and putting anywhere else. So it's really that product which is then scanned at that time. Yeah.
Okay. And then I know I said it was the last question, but now I have a question because you mentioned data security. And I guess the
hmm
sensitivity of data, especially in these applications and use cases, is critical. So my question is, from a data protection perspective, how do you take care of the RFID tag that it can't be read by anybody, let's say? And then I promise
Yeah,
that's the last question, Daniel.
yeah, but it's also a good one, but a very safe one because um, especially at that time where all the pay applications did start with RFID technology, this was considered very well. And meanwhile, it's just difficult then for the user to choose the correct IC because you have plenty full of possibilities. So you can use a memory which you can protect from your own. So that's then just um, write once, as it called. So you have then a write bit, and as soon as you have write that, you cannot change that information. But also along through the regulations about how to read and write the data onto these chips, you can imagine your credit card. So even then, the communication between the reader and the RFID can be protected. But as I said, there are lots of safety requirements possible with RFID technology, but typically that goes direct to the price. So if you have then a very big memory and a lot of security inside this IC, which is then possibly to do for sure, then we're talking also about more expensive RFIDs. But security is, at least nowadays, not really an issue for RFIDs. So that's really easy thing. There are standards there like ISO 14638 then what you can choose for more security. And then you just need to look at also your reader and writer is also supporting the standards. And therefore this is quite safe then if you want to have this safety.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, with that said, I think we will close there. I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. I'd also like to thank Eric and Daniel for their support and the presentation. We will distribute, as mentioned, the slides, and we hope to see you again in the future on another Weidmann Medical Technology seminar or webinar, as it is. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.